I've spoken with a number of people in our bubble coaching calls over the last few weeks where we've deliberated over whether you should still be using the create chat completion endpoint from OpenAI or whether you should be using the new beta list of endpoints such as assistants, threads, messages, and runs. In this tutorial video, I'm going to give my explanation of when working with Bubble and building a web app with bubble.io, you'll want to weigh up these different pros and cons with each. But before I launch into that, if you are learning Bubble, then there's no better place to do it than joining our community over at planetnocode.com, where we've got hundreds of Bubble tutorial videos and we've got discount Bubble coaching where you can book a call with me and we can work through that pain point, that frustration. I'm not exaggerating when I've had people tell me that they spent 8 hours on something and we fixed it in 30 minutes on a Bubble coaching call. So let's just begin with the old. And I say old, but let's bear in mind that OpenAI have giving the impression that they release very quickly and that we should actually expect things to change, especially beta. Whenever you're using any beta software, you're taking a risk if you use it in your own production software because they could scrap it. Or they could change bits. They could break things overnight. Now, I think that's unlikely given the scale at which OpenAI operates, but you should bear that in mind. So let's start with the old, which is chat completion. I've gone to the wrong bit. I mean to go to chat completion. Here we go. So this is the endpoint which we use in most of our OpenAI and Bubble tutorial videos from the last year. This is where, if you've been watching our previous videos where we engage with GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4, then we're probably using this endpoint. And one reason for doing that is it's been around the longest, but also it is the simplest way to get a like ChatGPT clone working in Bubble. And that's because when you compile together your request, it's going to look something like this. Check out, like I said, we've got tons of videos on this, but if this is looking a little bit alien to you, go and check out our other videos. But you put together a request, and first thing to point out is that when you send a new chat, you have to supply all of the previous messages. There is a list of messages, and that is the only way that you can ensure that OpenAI keeps track of the previous messages in the conversation. Now, the downsides of this are that it's going to affect your token count. It's going to affect basically how big a conversation can get. Now, remember that the token limits is just going to go up and up and up. I mean, if you don't have enough tokens with GPT 3.5 Turbo, you can start using GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K. So yeah, something to bear in mind. And we've got videos covering basically within 30 minutes, you can build a ChatGPT clone in Bubble, which keeps track of the conversation and provides all of the previous messages with the latest message in every single API call that you make, so that the chat is aware of the previous context of messages. It's historically aware of where the messages have been, the topics that have been covered. And so one of the advantages of that is that when you send an API request with all your messages to the chat completion endpoint, your Bubble app waits, and it waits to get a response. And the plus side of that is that you don't have to do anything else apart from save it, display it in your Bubble app, because the following action in your workflow can be to save or display the content of the workflow action that calls OpenAI. Downside of it is that if you are using a huge amount of text, thousands to thousands of tokens, you might still experience that the API call times out, in which case the Bubble app basically gives up, stops waiting for OpenAI to respond with the new message, and so that's going to leave a really poor experience for you and your users. But in a nutshell, TLDR, chat completion is by far the simplest way to add OpenAI's GPT models into your Bubble app. That brings us on to the new beta ones, and these came out, I believe it was the end of November 2023. So this comparison is a little bit late, but there you go. I'm still getting questions about it in the Bubble coaching calls. This is a completely different approach to basically how you structure your data and how you get engage with the OpenAI API. And it's broken down into these endpoints. So basically, when you want to create a new conversation, you create a thread. And this is setting up for what is potentially one of the advantages just get rid of that. One of the advantages with these new beta API endpoints is that OpenAI is now storing the conversation. Now, there's nothing I could find in the documentation about how long they store it. There are some minuscule storage costs associated with it, particularly if you're just storing text values. That's not a lot of data to store on someone's server. But yeah, you create a thread. And then you start to create messages in the thread. And this is the same way that you would go about here, where you go about listing your messages. In using the new beta API endpoints, you don't have to list all the messages every single time. You just have to create a message and assign it to the right thread ID based on the threads that you've created. Now, we've got a Bubble tutorial video demonstrating all of this that you can go and check out. But in case you want to skip ahead, I'll say it here. I think there is a major downside to this, and that's coming up. And then when you start adding messages, so let's say that you're just using it as like a general knowledge GPT, and so you say, what is the capital of France? You would create a message and assign it to the thread by using the thread ID parameter. But then nothing happens. All you've done is add the message to the thread. You've not done any of the AI magic or wizardry that we've become accustomed to. In order to do that, you have to run. And run is the command for OpenAI to actually look at the messages and generate a response. And this is the same whether you're responding to one message or whether you've got 20 messages in the thread. If you want OpenAI to respond with what GPT, whichever model you're using, is going to write, you have to use run. And this is where you can assign an assistant ID. And if we go into assistants, this is basically an alternative way to using a system prompt. And the people I've spoken to so far say that assistants works better than a system prompt. This being an example here of a system prompt, is that you can create an assistant. And the advantage of that is that you could create, say, 4 different assistants for like 4 different personas for your SaaS app that you're building in Bubble. And then you can deploy those same 4 assistants across all of your conversations or threads that your users engage with. Because when you run, you can provide an assistant ID. And so that's going to define the tone, the background knowledge, the persona, the style of which OpenAI writes the reply message. And so you run the create run prompt, API call on the thread ID. You can supply an assistant, you can supply a model. Then this is where I think the downside comes in, which is that, the thread list of messages on the OpenAI servers updates, but there's no way of informing your Bubble app that has happened. Now, I really hope, because this is in beta, that one of the things that they will change is they will add in webhooks, using a service like Assembly AI, which is a speech to text transcription service, where if you upload 10 minutes of a 10-minute audio file, it could probably take 5 minutes or so, a little bit less than that. It's going to take more than a minute to transcribe it. You can supply a webhook endpoint, and then your app is alerted when the processing on their server is completed. OpenAI doesn't have that. So you need to keep checking and retrieving run. And then when you know that the run is complete, then you will need to refresh the messages, get the list of messages, and you'll need to find a way of saving the new message or simply showing a list of messages. So that's the main downside. One other upside is that you can, when you create an assistant, you can supply file IDs such as PDF files. So if you want your assistant to be trained on like a medium-sized amount of data, then the assistant has the advantage over that. But if you're simply wanting to provide a bit of background knowledge, you could still use the system role in your messages when you use the chat completion endpoint, and then you don't have to worry about getting Bubble to say every second. You have to get Bubble every second to check if there are new messages and if the run is complete, which seems to me to be a real waste of workload units. So those are my thoughts. If you've got any questions or any thoughts of your own, please leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe this video to continue to support our ambition to become the best place to learn Bubble on the internet.